Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Curt Trailer Hitch Receiver on a 2019 Chrysler Pacifica. Now this is what your hitch is going to look like when it's installed. And the great part about this hitch is it is a hidden cross tube, meaning the only thing that you're going to see once it's installed is going to be the receiver opening. And this one, being a 2" by 2" receiver tube opening, is a great size. You're going to have tons of options available for bike racks, cargo carriers, or even a ball mount if you're looking to tow. Now all of those accessories are going to stay in place with a 5/8 pin and clip, and the hitch does not come with a pin and clip. A lot of times when you pick up accessories, they'll come with one. If you want to pick up an extra or a locking pin and clip, we actually have those available here at eTrailer. I really like the locking ones because once you put your accessory in place, you could lock it in and know that no one's going to walk away with your accessories. Your rolled style safety chain loops mean that hooking up safety chains on a trailer are going to be nice and easy, whether it be a larger clevis style or even a standard S hook. It's nice and open. And speaking of towing, you have some decent weight capacities here. Your gross trailer weight rating is your trailer plus the accessories loaded onto it, and this is going to be rated at 4,000 pounds, which is pretty good. You also have a tongue weight rating of 400 pounds, which is going to be that downward pressure that's put on the inside of the receiver tube opening. So that's going to be your cargo carriers or bike racks. And with that weight limit, you can really load it up. You could probably get a 4-bike rack loaded on here with no problem. Now this can be used with a weight distribution hitch, and it is going to bump those numbers up a little bit. Your gross trailer weight rating is going to go to 5,000 pounds, and your tongue weight will be 500. Now keep in mind you want to check your vehicle's owner's manual to see what the Pacifica is actually capable of towing, and then compare that with the hitch and take the lower of those two numbers so you stay safe. A few quick measurements here from the center of the hitch pin hole to the furthest point of the rear fascia. We're looking at 6 inches, and this is going to be important for some of your folding accessories like your cargo carrier or bike racks. When they're in a stowed position, you want to make sure they don't make contact with your rear fascia or that you can fold them up in general. So keep that in mind when choosing accessories. Now we're also going to get our ground clearance here, which comes in right at about 1 foot. And that's going to be important if you are picking up a ball mount to measure the coupler of your trailer. And with that measurement, you should be able to determine if you need a rise or a drop to be able to hook up to that. Now also keep in mind if you have a cargo carrier bike rack added on here with that 12 inches, you do want to be careful as you go up an incline or if you're going on any rocky or rough terrain, as that will want to tilt towards the ground and it can damage your accessories while loaded. So just keep that in mind. Now as far as the installation goes, this one isn't too terrible. You do have to trim a heat shield as well as the underbody panel and lower down your exhaust to be able to get the hitch in place. But really we're going to be just fish wiring in some hardware, lifting it up, bolting it in, and getting everything back once it's all trimmed. So I'm going to walk you through all the steps to make sure that you get your hitch installed. Let's take a look at that. Our installation is going to begin underneath the vehicle where we are going to be removing this large underbody panel. And there's a series of 3 different types of tools we'll need. So we'll need a 8mm, a 10mm, as well as a flathead screwdriver to get this taken down. So I'm going to start with my 8mm. Now we're on a lift so you guys can see this at home, but again, with all of this, you should be able to do this in your driveway or garage. And starting on this outside edge, you'll see that there's an 8mm screw. And as you work along, you should find the other ones along here. And then also once we get to this inner liner here, there's going to be, looks like 2 of them vertical and then 1 of them that's going to be kind of in the wheel well. So you may need a small ratcheting wrench or a very small ratchet to get in there, as it can get a little bit tight. And throughout this whole process, as we take hardware off, have them organized. That way, reinstallation goes a little bit smoother. Now you'll see that there's going to be 2 underbody panels as you kind of work your way up towards the suspension arm. So we'll take off these 2, and that's going to gain us access to the plastic nuts, which are going to be 10mm. And the plastic nuts, sometimes you need to put a little bit of pressure by pulling down on the underbody panel for these to kind of come off. But we'll go ahead, just go through, find all of the plastic nuts and get those removed. Now you're also going to find these plastic caps that have arrows on them. So just a flathead screwdriver or a large Phillips. As you kind of rotate that, again, just kind of put pressure on the underbody panel and those should come loose. So just kind of pull down as you twist. You may need to put a screwdriver kind of behind it to kind of help this along. So now at this point, once you have all your hardware off, you should be able to remove this whole underbody panel. Now we're going to be reinstalling this after we trim it, but for now we're going to set this aside. Now we are going to be lowering down our exhaust by removing the isolators, but before we do that, we want to make sure that we're supporting it. So if you're doing this in your driveway or garage, you can just get a block of wood or a box or something along those lines just to kind of support this. Once we pop it off, it is going to want to hang down, and we don't want to damage the exhaust further upstream. So I'm using a cam buckle strap. I'm just going to go across my suspension here and get this supported here. And as far as removing the isolators, you're going to have one that's kind of tucked up in this corner, and then we have one that's going to be right here, kind of where our underbody panel's separated. And if you need to, you can put a little bit of soapy water or penetrating oil or really anything to kind of help lubricate these. These can kind of get dry and get tricky, but you can use the exhaust tip here to kind of just pry on this. And if you don't have a pry bar, you can use a long flathead screwdriver. And just kind of work this side to side, and you should be able to get this to pry off. And sometimes it also helps if you may have to move the exhaust a little bit to get that movement, but we'll get this one popped off, and then we're going to work on that further one. There's that. It doesn't matter if you pry off the bottom one or the top one. Whichever one comes off a little bit easier, go ahead and do that. You may need a little leverage again, so if you need to, you can kind of push the exhaust to the side to kind of give you that room to work. Now we need to remove the heat shield. So since the exhaust is loosened up, that's going to give us that space to be able to get the plastic 10mm nut that's up here. There's also one that's kind of tucked here where the exhaust bends. So go ahead, get those removed, and you can remove your heat shield. We'll also be trimming this later, so we'll just set this aside for now until we have to reinstall it. Now we are going to be using a fish wire technique to get our hardware in place, and we're going to focus on these two holes, and this is where we're going to pass our spacer block and our carriage bolt through. And in order to do that, we need to use our fish wire. So I'm going to go through this circular hole and feed this back to this larger square, and that's going to be our access hole to get everything passed in. So we take that coiled section and just kind of feed this through. And to make this to where it doesn't pull through on the back end here, you can bend this. It's also going to help a little bit when we get the hitch up in place. Now take your spacer block and you can just throw that over the coil there and into the frame rail. And then we'll just thread on our carriage bolt. Now get your carriage bolt passed in that square as well. And then just pull this end of the fish wire down, and you may jostle it until you get this to pop through. Now keep your fish wire on. We're going to keep this on until we raise the hitch up in place, and that just makes sure that these don't pop back in the frame rail. And we'll just repeat here. And then we're just going to go on the other side of the vehicle and get the same hardware passed in the exact same way. And for our final mounting point, we're going to be using our access hole, and we're going to be using the larger spacer block. So just feed this over the coil, and this is going to be a reverse fish wire technique. So what we'll do is pass up our carriage bolt, and then our spacer block. And then we can just pull this down. Now make sure this spacer block is kind of not binding up on the frame. You want to make sure that this drops down all the way. And then we'll repeat on the other side. So now we're going to get ready to put our hitch up in place, and I recommend having an extra set of hands to be able to do this, and also have at least one serrated flange nut ready on each side, because once we lift this up, we're going to try to just hand thread one of them on to kind of hold that up and support it to get it to where it's a little bit easier to get the rest of the hardware in. So first thing, you're going to want to take your fish wires and feed them through the corresponding holes. Now, you'll see that there's two holes very close together up front. Make sure that you're not using the furthest one back, as that one goes around a factory ground stud. So just feed these in, and that's where that little bend comes into place. Once you kind of pop this in, it kind of holds it. And then we're just going to pass this up. And make sure you go over the muffler first, so you may need to kind of tilt it in there. And then as you raise up, you'll get your studs to pass through. And I'll just choose this middle one here. I'm going to take off my fish wire. So what you can do is just put a little bit of pressure with your finger if you can. If you can get it started just by lightly threading it on, that's going to work. The main thing is you're not pushing this back up into the frame rail. But once you get one started on each side, you can go ahead, pull your fish wires off, and get the other hardware in place. Now once you have them hand tightened on, we're going to go ahead with a 3/4 inch socket and get these snug down. Now we're going to be coming back with a torque wrench, so no need to get crazy here, we just want it snug. Now at this point with our torque wrench, we're going to use the torque setting found in the instruction manual to get this tightened down. And if you need a torque wrench, we have these available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. So we're going to go ahead and trim our heat shield before putting it back up, and I've gone ahead and marked it. Now you can measure from the bottom to here. There is a diagram in the instruction manual, and as far as cutting this, it can get very sharp once you start making raw edges, so just be careful, maybe wear gloves. And I'm also going to peel that back with my gloves after the fact. Now as far as cutting, you can use a pair of shears like I have here. You can also use a Dremel or really any cutting device that you may have, but go ahead and cut along this line. So what I'll do here is on our sharp edges, I tend to roll these over just so it's a little bit safer. It's not going to be as sharp. Definitely have a pair of gloves here, so anything that's really sharp, you can kind of bend that back just to kind of make it a little bit less sharp. So now we'll go ahead and get this heat shield put back in place. Now we're only going to be using one of the plastic nuts that this had originally, as we did have one of the other spots was cut off that was up here, so we'll put our plastic nut right here. And now we can actually get our exhaust isolators put back on. I've gone ahead and marked out our underbody panel, and we do need to trim this out to gain access, or at least make access for our hitch. And this does mean that some of our mounting points are no longer going to be going up, so just keep that in mind. You will probably have extra hardware. So using this tape line gives me a nice straight edge here, and I'm going to go ahead and trim this out. Now with our underbody panel trimmed out, we can go ahead and get this put back in place with the hardware that we removed previously. Now with our underbody panel put back in place, make sure you take whatever you had supporting your exhaust out of the way. And then all that's left to do is load up whatever accessories you may have and start using your hitch. And that was a look at installation of the Curt Trailer Hitch Receiver on a 2019 Chrysler Pacifica.